hey, here's Bob Richards. Come on out, I'll tell people who you are. So, the moon is actually Earth's 8th continent. And Bob and his team at Moon Express want to be the guys who run the trucking company. He wants to be a trucker. He wants to be a trucker to the moon, space trucker. I first met Bob 100 years ago when he was involved with the International Space University, the ISU, and I had a little simulator ride at the base of the CN Tower called Tour of the Universe. We learned that we were both quite fabulously in love with space and the idea of a space-faring generation up ahead. And over the years, we continued to meet each other, and the long and the short of it, full disclosure, I am a small shareholder in Bob's company. So, MoonX is in the competition for the Lunar X Prize to be the first company to actually, private sector, deliver a payload to the moon, and then do it again, right? And again, and we're heading for the real thing in 2017. So Bob's going to tell you what's happened in the last year and what are the breakthroughs that have been achieved.
Thank you.
Bob Richards.
So I'm here to update you from the front lines of the space frontier. And it's a journey, as Moses described. It's a long journey into space. It's one that began for me as a child of Apollo. Earliest memories as a little boy walking around the rocket garden at the Kennedy Space Center. Who's been to the rocket garden where they have, right? So they have those tall rockets that put together the propulsion and the avionics and the materials and the dreams of an entire generation and sent people methodically up to the moon. And in the 70s, I became an orphan of Apollo as that false dawn didn't happen, of that promise that was made to my generation as kids, that we'd have our moon colonies, that we'd have our wheels in space, that we have our Mars colonies. Wasn't happening in the 80s. What happened was that generation started to do something about it. So I tried to, what can I do? Well, I was here in Toronto. I'm born and bred a Canadian in and around Toronto. Studied engineering at Ryerson and physics at University of Toronto. And just after I'd met Moses in the early 80s, I got in my 1979 Camaro and headed down to Cornell to study with Carl Sagan, who had put my vision on Mars. So I began a journey to Mars around 1984. And it was in 2004, 20 years later, that I had the honor of participating in putting the Canadian flag, eventually, on the surface of Mars in 2007 on a NASA mission called the NASA Phoenix Mars Lander. How many in the audience here know that Canada is on Mars, the Canadian flag on the surface of Mars? Not that many. In 2007, one of the instruments built here in Toronto with contributions from all over the country, funded by the Canadian Space Agency, built by the private sector, gifted to NASA, put on a lander, sent millions and millions of miles through space, landing on the North Pole of Mars and detecting for the first time falling snow on Mars. How appropriate that the Canadians' contribution to the science of Mars was the detection of that falling snow. And in that honor of being involved in that program, I discovered that space is also very expensive when it's in the hands of the government alone. So on that $400 million lander that the United States taxpayers paid for went a $40 million barnacle of a science instrument that we all paid for. And if you add it all up, it was something on the order of a $500 million mission to answer, so yes, some very important scientific questions, but gosh, that's a lot of money. And is there a way that maybe we could do it better? And if aviation was in the hands of the government throughout the last 100 years, imagine what the aviation industry would look like today. right? The reason that we can now buy tickets and fly from Toronto to Paris for $500 if you get it on sale is because of the transformation of technology into the hands of entrepreneurs and competition and lowering the prices and increasing the safety. So we need to do that to space. We are still stuck with large vehicles that we throw away after launching them into space. Imagine the cost of air travel if you flew to Paris and threw away the plane. And only recently, in the hands of incredible entrepreneurs like Elon Musk of SpaceX, are we starting to see what the future was supposed to look like, with rockets coming down, right? Not just going up and landing, so bringing reusability and economics into it. I believe that we are on the cusp of a transformation of the human species as important as the transformation of life on Earth from the oceans to the land. We are now at the cusp of evolving as a species into space. And I think that there is no more important transformation that will take place than our transformation from a planetary species to a multi-world species. So my goal, my life, my aspirations have been dedicated to helping humanity become that multi-world species in whatever way I can help. Let me update you on what we're doing today. So, one of the ironies of the space age is that only by going out into space and by looking back on Earth and those first images of the Earth as a pristine, fragile blue dot, did we understand the fragility of this Earth. And further observations from space are giving us glimpses into how much we're impacting the Earth and how much we have finite resources. The irony of going out into space was kind of the sense that we have a finite sphere, and it led to the idea that, geez, we have to conserve everything. All we can hope for is what we have in this little fragile ball. Well, conservation is very good stewardship of our home planet. We should absolutely do that. But everything that we need and everything we fight for here on Earth is available in almost infinite quantities in space, materials and energy. So, by moving out into space, we need to take advantage of what's out there. And we need to do so not just with governments, but with economics, with the reasons to stay, the reasons that we went to the moon with 10 years of incredible effort and only 3 years later abandoned the moon, never to return, was because the premise was about superpower politics. And when we go back to the moon and when we go to Mars, when we go to the asteroids, it's going to be for a different purpose. It'll be to make humanity a multi-world species and to help the economics of space help Earth. Well, to me, there's a great stepping stone. It's called the moon. And we all know it because it's in the sky and we see it all the time. So when I first saw the moon as a child through the eyes of Apollo, it was a dead, dry rock, right? A bunch of dust. And there was, what use was it? Well, what we've discovered, particularly in the last decade, is the moon is a reservoir of vast resources. Everything that we need here on Earth, the platinum, the gold, the silver, that all came from space. It came from the early bombardment of asteroids on the Earth. We have to dig for those things because the Earth was molten in the early history. And everything that was delivered to Earth was also delivered to the moon. You know those craters? Every crater is an asteroid impact. You've probably heard that every asteroid has trillions of dollars of resources. Well, imagine what's been accumulating there on the surface of the moon. But the most radical discovery of the moon that changes the economics, not just of the resources in the moon, but the economics of the entire solar system, is the discovery that there's water on the moon. Water is like the oil of the solar system. Why? Because water, H2O, hydrogen and oxygen, not just support life, but it's also fuel, right? It could be converted into rocket fuel. So you don't have to take everything with you. You can actually refuel on the moon. We've learned that the moon is a gas station in the sky. And so think about when we sent the sailing ships across the oceans, we didn't take everything that we needed to live. We lived off the land. We took the tools. We used the resources of the land that when we got there. So when we go to the moon, we're going to use the resources of the moon to unlock the solar system for humanity. So we have a problem. Problem is that it's very expensive. We've talked about how the governments have been the dominant taxis to space. Only recently do we have entrepreneurial companies, Blue Origin, SpaceX, Virgin Galactic, others, lessening the cost, collapsing the cost of getting us off the surface of the Earth and into Earth orbit. But these are coastal vessels. These are just like the ships that hugged the coasts of thousands of years ago and connected the towns along the coastal. What we need are the ocean-faring vessels, the ones that go beyond Earth to the new lands, to collapse that cost as well. So our mission, my company, Moon Express, as Elon and Jeff Bezos collapse the cost of getting into space, we want to collapse the cost of getting everywhere else. We're the what then? So we're creating robotic spacecraft that once they go into Earth orbit can go elsewhere. Our first goal is to be the first private company to land on the moon. And by doing so, I hope, do the space equivalent of the 4-minute mile, proving to a young generation that we are pioneers as a species. We are adventurers, and to capture that sense that we can do amazing things, and also, it's a great business. I said once that we go to the moon not because it is easy, but because it is profitable. But it is also a vision of a future. And those that are 10 years old today will have children who will look up and see lights on the moon and know that we are really members of a multi-world species. Where we're starting as a small company is with small spacecraft, with microlanders, small robots that are smaller than this black dot, that can go to the moon and learn more about it, find out where the resources are, provide transportation to science and commerce, and build our capability of creating kind of a railway to that moon rush where all those resources are. So here's the update. We've been working hard now. Moon Express started its journey around 2007, so about 10 years. It's a long way into space. In 2010, I left Canada, moved down to Silicon Valley, found people with backpacks that had $1 billion in their bank account and wanted some risky adventures. They called them moonshots. And I said, I've got a moonshot. So I found my co-founders and my investors in Silicon Valley. We started partnering with NASA to utilize technology that was sitting around that NASA had already used, and we invested in that technology and learned how to do spacecraft and landers. They look like things like this. Somebody told me this kind of looks like Darth Vader. Does it to you as well, a little bit? But they're not scary. These are prototype landers that we have learned on. So we've been able to put private investment into dormant government assets and bring new value out of them. And as we learned how to do these things, we graduated into bigger and bigger things. We got our training wheels at NASA Ames in California, at NASA Marshall in Alabama. We got our license to fly. We used our engineers with our software to fly the NASA landers. And then we introduced our new lander. So we're up to about end of 2013 now. And in Las Vegas, we unveiled the design of our new lander. We called it the MX-1. Looked like a donut. But it was innovative because it was designed to be a little spacecraft that can go as a secondary on a big launch vehicle and bring that cost down. So now can you actually fly it? Can a small company of 30 or 40 engineers do what only superpowers have done before and actually make this spacecraft fly, a spacecraft that will eventually be able to go to the moon? I'm going to share with you a 2-minute video about the summary of our tests at the Kennedy Space Center just a couple of years ago. Thank you. But can you do it on the moon? Well, we're going to find out in a year, because our goal is to land our spacecraft by the end of next year, 2017, becoming the first private company to reach the surface of the moon, winning the Google Lunar X Prize, first prize of $20 million, and setting forth a series of missions to go back again. And by 2020, we hope to be able to bring something back, bring a sample back from the moon, and do what only superpowers have ever done before. We are very fortunate to be able to utilize large government dormant facilities, and one of those is down at Cape Canaveral, where the world learned about space by launching rockets and looking back. We've actually been able to take over one of those launch complexes. And so we're an intrepid entrepreneurial group of people down where they used to send government missions to the moon, and now we're practicing and learning how to do it ourselves. Our Launch Complex 36, we share with another company called Blue Origin, and with Jeff Bezos, and it's a really cool neighborhood now. So where it was, turned into alligators, and now it's cool again. And we're reaching not just for the moon, but for Mars and asteroids, and eventually stars. We're partnered with NASA under a program called the Lunar Catalyst Program, where NASA sees the value of helping provide technology and assistance. Because if we can collapse the cost, then NASA can procure from us. NASA, when it wants to send a package across the city, doesn't call the government courier service, it calls FedEx. So when they want to send an instrument or a package to the moon, they'll call MoonX. Right? So that's where we're going, where the commercial sector is taking over the job of transportation, like it did in the aviation industry, like it did in the shipping industry, now what we'll do in the spaceflight industry. So here's where we are. We've now purchased not one, not three, but 5 rockets from another upstart company called Rocket Lab that had the audacity to offer a $5 million rocket. Rockets that used to cost $60 or $80 or $100 million when I first started the company, we can now go to the web, put it in our shopping cart, $4.9 million, you got a rocket to the moon. So we bought 5. And we're a Pathfinder. When we started the company, you identify the highest risks, right? What are the highest risks of starting a company that wants to go to the moon? How about money? How do you find the financing? That was the number 1 risk. We're doing pretty good there. I've got wonderful co-founders and great investors. We've raised just over $30 million. We're raising another 20 or 25 right now, and that, less than the cost of a grade B Hollywood movie, we're going to go to the moon for that amount of money. Then the next thing was technical. Could we actually build that spacecraft? I showed you we're making pretty good progress. In a couple of months, I'm going to unveil a new spacecraft built on that design, designed to go on the Electron that's going to go to the moon. What was the number 3 risk when we started the company was regulatory, right? Who would stop us from going to the moon? Well, guess what? We're venturing where no private sector has gone before, so there are no laws. So what now was the least risky element of our venture has now become the most risky, because we need a license to go to the moon. Who knew? But it makes sense. And I am the last one, I promise you, to want big government. But it makes sense because we need some sort of traffic control. So we want to make sure when we have vehicles on the highways that people are licensed and there are rules of the road. When we go into space, we want to make sure there's rules of the road. So it makes sense for each government to take responsibility from those companies that are going to go into space, go to the moon, and go to other places. The moon is rising in D.C. It's not been there, done that. The point is, can't do it anymore. The United States is going back to the moon. It's going to happen. Congress, in its last appropriations bill, said we're going to go back to the moon. We're not going to do it like a big Apollo program. We're going to partner with the private sector. So in 2017, next year, we're going to return. We're not going to return for flags and footprints. We're going to return to help humanity become a multi-world species, to inspire a new generation so those kids get that same sense of expedition and adventure that I had as a kid. And from the moon will become a stepping stone, not just to Mars, but to the stars. Thank you very much.